Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am Dr. Javed Iqbal Khokar, Professor of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology. And continuing with the topic of personal identity, this is the third lecture. And in this lecture, I will be discussing the trace evidence. And the contents of this talk will be today, I will be discussing what is trace evidence and what are various types of trace evidences, what is the significance of trace evidence, and the principle which governs is the Locard exchange principle and how it dictates. So talking about the trace evidence, trace means to seek, to find out, to work, or a tiny amount, trace, a small amount. So all these are the meaning of the word trace, or a residue of something. Trace, small amount, tiny amount, to seek, to work, these are all the meanings. And evidence is the fact. Evidence is the fact which we perceive with our five senses. That is the evidence. So, trace evidence is described as a small amount of evidence which is left at the scene of crime. So, any material, any trace, any tiny amount which is left anywhere, that can be a scene of crime, that can be any locus, and that evidence is helpful in finding the identity of that individual. So that is an important evidence, the fact which belongs to that individual who has left it over or who has unknowingly transferred it to that place. So this material is collected and this will lead to identity of this trace, this material. We will identify first this material and its identity will lead to the identity of the individual to whom it belongs. And this is basically contact trace evidence, and it can be explained as that any contact, any physical contact between two objects, two things at any place, that can be a scene of crime or any other locus, there is always exchange of material. Whenever there is contact of two, there will be exchange of material. And this, if it is a scene of crime, that exchange is between the assailant and the victim. And when they come in contact with each other, there is a transfer of material from the assailant to the victim and from victim to the assailant. And this now means that any leftover material at the scene or on the body of the victim or on the body of the assailant or anything which is left over to that place, to that locus, that acts as important evidence and it narrates the whole story. It tells about the telltale. It will tell everything regarding its identity, regarding what has happened. So it helps in the recognition of its evidence. So this trace will act as an evidence, help us in recognizing, and we will establish its association with a particular place, particular person. So this is how it works, that we will first we will have to isolate a trace, then establish its identity, and then association of this trace to that particular individual to whom it belongs. And that can be a person, that can be a thing, or that can be a place. And this clue will help us to finding out the identity of that source. So that trace will help in identity from the source to which it belongs. So trace is the material which is left over at the scene of crime or on the body of the assailant or the victim, and which acts as evidence and help us in establishment of the identity of the source to which it belongs. So trace evidence is a small tiny material which acts as an evidence and help us in identity of that trace and association with a particular individual. Now, what are various types of evidences or the trace evidences which are left over? They can be measured two main types of trace evidences, like it can be a biological material or it can be a non-biological material. And the trace evidence may also be in the form of a stain, or it can be some material. Stain, any blood stain, semen stain, saliva stain, or a frank fluid. So it can be in the form of stain on the clothes, on the locus, or anything, or it can be a leftover material, the mobile phone, the keychain, the pen, or anything material which is left over. So similarly, the origin of that stain maybe that can be biological and non-biological. So we have to establish first what is the stain which is or material which is new in that place and to whom it belongs. So the biological stain of various traces, that can be a human. First we have to establish that what type of stain it is, whether this is a human or it is an animal. And if it is not decomposed, it is a very valuable information and it will help us to finding out the source of its origin. And non-biological may be any material which is present at the scene of crime, and it may be left over by the assailant or by the victim, anything. It can be a belonging, it can be an ornament, it can be anything which is left over by the victim or the assailant. Now, what is the significance of trace evidence? If it is a biological evidence, biological material, and we establish that to whom it belongs, it originates from human or from animal. And when we establish the source with which can be a body fluid or a body tissue. So whatever trace we find out in the form of fluid, in the form of tissues, we first have to establish whether it is human or it is animal. Then that biological evidence which is in the form of fluid, it can be saliva, it can be blood, it can be semen, or any other body fluid which can be CSF, cerebrospinal fluid, urine, vomitus, stomach wash, or any other excreta. So these body fluids can be in the form of stains at the scene of crime or on the clothes or on the body orifices like urethra, vagina, or the rectum of the assailant or the victim. Then the other biological materials like the human hair. Human hair can be scalp hair, the body hair, or the pubic hair. So this can also very helpful. The hair belong to which area of the body and to which person it is. Then scrapings, the nail scraping, the epithelia, it gathers under the nails and it can also be helpful. Epithelium of the skin can be left over. The shedding of the epithelium of the assailant or victim can be on the scene of crime or on each other. So the scraping of the nails, if there is scuffle, it gathers under the nails and it helps in establishing the identity if it is a physical or the sexual assault. And to whom it belongs, it can be from the assailant or from the victim. So the source of hair, for example, if we have to establish that it may be of animal origin or human origin. So any material which we find out, whether it is hair, whether it is fluid, whether it is blood, first of all we have to establish that this thing is the thing under question. If we are trying to establish hair, we first will establish this is hair or not. And if it is hair, whether this is human or it is animal. And if it is human, then it is from the head, that from the brow, from the body, from the pubes. So we will establish from which area it belongs, and then we establish other characteristics. And if it is a non-biological evidence, it can be the personal belonging, and it can be from the environment. So any non-biological finding which can be transferred from the persons to the crime scene or from the crime scene to the person, that is non-biological finding in any form. The personal belongings can be clothes, can be spectacles, the wristwatch, wallet, or anything, pen, ring, anything that can be left over. And the material from the environment which can be transferred to the individuals, it can be fiber of the carpet, it can be leaf, grass, seeds of the fields, soil, dirt, or anything from the crime scene to the individuals. And the article can be the bottles, the glass, the tablets, the bullet, the pellet, the shells. So any article can be left over and found out, or any weapon of offense. It can be knife, it can be a firearm weapon, it can be pistol, or anything that can be found. So the trace evidence, basically this is governed by a principle which is called as Locard exchange principle. And Sir Edmund Locard from 1877 to 1966, he introduced the using of this trace evidence for personal identification. So it was his idea, his research, that any trace which is left over at the scene of crime is an important evidence. It can help us in identification. And that person established first this lab in a small room, and now it has become a full-fledged university. So Locard exchange principle states that every contact leaves a trace, and this exchange of trace is a two-way process. That means when two individuals come into contact, assailant and victim, there will be transfer of material from the assailant to the victim and from victim to the assailant, and from both to the scene of crime. From assailant to the scene of crime, from the victim to the assailant crime, and vice versa, from the scene of crime in the reverse order to the assailant and the victim. So it is always a two-way process. So when we talk about the medico-legal importance of the trace evidence, we first have to isolate it, that which material, which thing is a trace, and then we will identify it. That if we are talk about particular thing that is here, we establish that this is here. If it is blood, we will establish first it is blood, and then it will be compared and it will be examined for its source, from where it belongs. If it is human, then whose identity it is, and that will confirm the identity of that person from that source. So the classical example, there are many examples, but the classical example is the sexual assault. In sexual assault, there is always exchange of material from assailant to the victim and from victim to the assailant, and from both of them to the scene of crime, and from the scene of crime to both of them. Similarly, the physical assault and the hit and run accident, there will be tire marks, there will be broken glasses, there will be blood marks, or they will tell us about the telltale of the incident. When we talk about the sexual assault, in which there is transfer of biological material such as semen and blood, and it occurs from assailant to the victim, from victim to the assailant, and also from the victim and assailant both to the scene of crime, and from the scene of crime to the both victim. Similarly, the non-biological material from the scene of crime is transferred to the assailant and the victim. So this is two-way process. Assailant to the victim, assailant to the locus, and victim to the locus, and assailant to victim. The both, all three, they are two-way processes. So beside trace evidence, the most common method which are used by the police is anthropometry. and dactylography for the confirmation of the. So thank you very much. This is all about the trace evidence, and we talked about how it helps in establishing the identity. We'll continue the personal identity in the next lecture. Take care. Allah Hafiz.